Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Hylian and welcome to the final part of Super Smash Bros. Cross Final Fantasy VII, an encore feature for a living legacy exploring Final Fantasy VII's journey to Super Smash Bros. And the parallel history surrounding FF7's legacy to Nintendo and its fans. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, please consider doing so through the link in the description so you can catch up with everything addressed here. And to those who already are up to date, let's get into it. We left off as we concluded the breakdown of the aftermath of Cloud's debut in Smash 4 to fans and its impact to Nintendo. From here on out, we'll explore the dawn of the new generation of consoles that would set the stage for the consolidation of Square's full return. And of course, it will be the platform for a new Smash Bros. Title that was destined to feature the grand finale of our story.
So it's finally happened today. Final Fantasy VII has released on a Nintendo platform, and if you are a bit younger, you might not understand why this is a pretty big deal. I'm really happy if you've not played this game before, and you're gonna get to play it now. I'm pretty happy because this is gonna be a cool game to see other people really experience. I was a little surprised with how many people haven't played it yet, but it's I think it's really cool to see that. So
the Wii U reached the end of its life, performing even worse than the Nintendo GameCube, and Nintendo was already preparing for the release of their next hardware. The next generation of consoles was about to begin. Before their new system, the Nintendo Switch, was formally unveiled in late 2016, the world witnessed the first games ever announced for the system, or rather, the first ones alluded to being at least in strong consideration. These games were Dragon Quest XI and Dragon Quest X Online from Square Enix. Indeed, Square was already sending a strong message of support and interest for the Switch as a platform, a message debuting close to when Cloud's inclusion in Smash was made public in late 2015. Dragon Quest XI and Dragon Quest X Online were just the beginning of the onslaught of games the company would provide Nintendo with throughout the following generation. March 3rd would see the release of the Nintendo Switch, with high expectations of third-party support on top of Nintendo's own stellar software. Indeed, by this point in time, a number of major third-party development studios were revealed to be supporting the Switch, including Square Enix. This support from Square wouldn't take long to materialize. Works like I Am Setsuna and Octopath Traveler, as well as ports like the Collection of Mana, would define the first 2 years of Square's presence on the system. Dragon Quest X would also release in this period, as was teased years prior. Final Fantasy was a peculiar case. It would have the intriguing yet hilarious release of Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition HD, a port of an abridged mobile version of Final Fantasy XV. I say hilarious because the Switch was not only the last system to see this simple game released, but the timing of release couldn't have been worse for its sales potential. Final Fantasy XV came out 2 years prior to mixed reception due to rushed development delivering an incomplete experience, incredibly ironic given its history. The game further drove discourse among Final Fantasy fans that the mainline series was in a dramatic decline. By 2018, Square released numerous side games, expansions, and spin-offs to FF15 in an attempt to replicate the compilation of Final Fantasy VII's approach to franchise exploitation, albeit condensed in a time span of 2 years instead of 4. Oops, sorry, over 2 decades and counting. Actually, it's kind of ironic how the compilation is getting its own Pocket Edition, huh? Anyways, to say the industry was facing an oversaturation of FF15 would be an understatement. Now imagine the appeal this abridged mobile version port had in late 2018 to Nintendo fans, many of whom were either older Final Fantasy fans who didn't see FF15 as an entry aligned to the classic franchise they loved, or people who got their first contact with Final Fantasy through Smash and Mario spin-offs. Needless to say, this release wasn't gonna land a big splash on Switch, and to many who were hoping for mainline Final Fantasy to return to Nintendo systems, especially the debut of titles from the early PlayStation era, it seemed like this was going to be another generation of spin-offs and side games. But it seems that after a rough storm, there sometimes truly is a rainbow waiting at the end. On September 13th, 2018, just 1 week after the announcement of Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition HD for Switch, a Nintendo Direct was broadcasted worldwide with news on games releasing in late 2018 and beyond. Right before the final announcement of the presentation, a series of Final Fantasy announcements would be made. It began with typical spin-off titles you'd expect coming to Nintendo systems in that day and age. But as soon as the Chocobo Mystery Dungeon announcement was over, the definitive edition of Final Fantasy XII was revealed for the Switch. Yes, an actual mainline Final Fantasy game from the PlayStation era was landing on Nintendo. This was already exciting on its own, but the biggest news followed immediately afterwards.
Later on, you'll also be able to enjoy these other classics and their iconic scenes anytime, anywhere. Final Fantasy VII, 9, and 10/2 HD Remaster are coming to Nintendo Switch in 2019.
After almost 22 years, Final Fantasy VII's long journey to Nintendo finally came to an end, and there was no shortage of celebrations over this historic event. FF7's return to Nintendo would get ecstatic reception from fans and extensive coverage from the press, some even making entire retrospectives on the game's development history. Nintendo themselves would promote the game almost like it was an entirely new game, to the point where one of the ads for the Switch would feature Final Fantasy VII alongside Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the best-selling title on the platform to this day. You know, the man shouldn't have hit the guard scorpion when its tail is up. Needless to say, it was a historic moment, a massive deal to Nintendo, Square Enix, and fans. Above all, to see the original FF7 get this much attention, promotion, and celebration again, arguably the most it got since 1997, after such an extensive journey involving so many different people, was nothing short of magical. To many fans of the original game, after such a long time since its release and seeing Square expand the IP into something utterly unrecognizable, it was cathartic to witness the legacy of Final Fantasy VII live on and have new life under Nintendo and their reverence. I think such feelings from many at the time are probably best illustrated by the words of Kevin Wong in his article for Red Bull on FF7's journey to Nintendo. Quote, "Without spoiling things too much, a scene late on in Final Fantasy VII jumps forward 500 years with surprising emotional impact. It's not been quite that long, but it sometimes feels like it. For those of us with long memories, Final Fantasy VII's arrival on Nintendo Switch will be a welcome home, long overdue after literal decades of awkward estrangement. This treasured legacy would indeed live on, with many new fans introduced to it by this debut and inspired by Cloud's appearance in Nintendo's crossover, while many old fans found a renewed interest in revisiting this work. Square Enix would even be inspired by this important release and produce a small documentary on the original Final Fantasy VII, featuring interviews with key developers from that era. This documentary even served as a major source of information and clips for A Living Legacy, so I hope you check it out through the according link in the description. This festive and beloved release of Final Fantasy VII on Nintendo's system would be a fitting end to our story, but as we all know, there is still one more chapter to cover, one that brings it all together for a grand finale to this rich and extensive journey we've been exploring.
I remember back before we knew Smash Ultimate was Smash Ultimate, Cloud was like at the top of everyone's list in terms of cuts. Like people were like, oh, Cloud's gonna get cut. Cloud doesn't have a chance. And I'm so glad that, you know, Smash Ultimate ended up being what it is, you know, everyone's back, because like you, John, when Cloud was revealed for Smash, it felt not real. I'm just like, oh my god, is this really, really happening? And it was such a cool moment to have him revealed for Smash 4, and I'm so happy to have him back in Smash Ultimate.
Shortly before Satoru Iwata's passing, Masahiro Sakurai was given a final mission by the Nintendo president: coordinate the definitive Super Smash Bros. For the next system. This would be taken to heart, as Sakurai would head the same team at Bandai Namco responsible for Smash 4 into a new development cycle. The project plan would start as early as Bayonetta's release, concluding Smash 4 on December 2015, and the idea of a definitive Smash game suggested in Sakurai's mission would find itself incarnated in the most defining model for this entry in the series. Everyone is here. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, as it would be called, proceeded to be teased in early 2018 before its formal reveal at E3 just a few months later. The game was predicated on the return of every single character that appeared in the previous entry to comprise this new roster. This meant 65 characters were already set for the game, and they hadn't even begun to reveal new characters. The crossover scope of Smash would reach unprecedented heights with this base game goal alone, evolving into something even more majestic later down the line and matching some of the largest crossover endeavors in artistic history. The DLC inclusions would further cement this feat. Its third-party inclusions to the roster and extensive side content would make Smash not simply a platform of Nintendo history featuring a small participation of related guests anymore. Instead, Nintendo's crossover series became a classical gaming history museum. And I mean it when I say classical there, not just a general video game history museum like so many Smash fans tend to assume. Especially when they talk about icons that didn't make the cut for the roster. By this video's upload, my channel hasn't yet explored the artistic philosophy of audio-visual classicism. So for now, we can understand it as a style of artistic production that Nintendo has adopted for decades, which can also be perceived in numerous works not made by Nintendo. This is part of what defined the Nintendo DNA I referenced in part 1 of this Encore feature. Smash Bros. Has evolved now to the point of having a significant focus given to non-Nintendo IPs that fulfilled that philosophy at some point in their history. Echoing Sakurai's words from an earlier time, this scenario reiterates the idea that it's not any third-party character that will make it in. You could say the roster is still very much treated as an elite selection of classic characters that is constantly expanding to new horizons. Indeed, more than ever, a presence in the roster would have an immeasurable prestige and value for the character in question and the universe they represent, and the history they carry would bring even more weight to this new work. Amidst all this, perhaps the most interesting aspect of Ultimate is how it's fundamentally a celebration of Smash itself. The cast is organized in order of reveal for every Smash release chronologically, with the starting roster being the same initial 8 from the original Nintendo 64 classic. This reverence to history extends as far as even the stages, where the majority of locales previously seen in the series returned and were all remade into Ultimate's game engine. The majority of music featured throughout the series also made a return. It was, for a lack of a better term, the ultimate compilation of Super Smash Bros. Looking at the game's other features, a major highlight would definitely be Ultimate changing Smash's focus on trophies in favor of spirits as a way of representing different universes in the crossover. Spirits are, to put it bluntly, images, rather than new 3D models, of artworks or renders of specific characters and vehicles from numerous franchises or from Smash itself. In the former case, it serves as an additional symbol of reverence to the source material's history, as it highlights a part of the work that not only carries its own artistic history, but also provides a heavy tie to the work it's from by being a direct import of one of its assets. Going for images over 3D models helped Smash cover representation for a lot more franchises and the characters within them, including third-party IPs. Many non-Nintendo works that weren't represented in the playable roster got their own moment in the spotlight, be it in base game or through post-release events and updates. Frankly, I just wish the descriptions illustrating the historical background each trophy had was also something present for Spirits 2. With all that said, the most important role Spirits fulfilled was being the basis for the game's story mode. Inspired by a draft for Brawl's Subspace Emissary and the final act for that story's final version, Ultimate's story, named World of Light, revolved around the rise of a tyrannical angelic being, which the main cast is unable to defeat, and it ends up resetting the universe. With only Kirby surviving, the pink hero goes on a journey to recover the fallen heroes and free the enslaved spirits in this universe. It's a much shorter and simpler story compared to Brawl's, but it's an interesting experience that focuses on unlocking spirits through thematic battles that reference the character in question. In a way, you could say that spirit battles are a subtle version of a description of the entities they represent, referencing things like character traits, relationships, and history. With all of this in mind, you can get an idea of the unprecedented scope of Smash Ultimate's crossover and its appeal to celebration of the series' history and the classical gaming medium it represents. It's time we indulge into how Cloud was part of this event. Final Fantasy VII's presence in the game was a given when taking "everyone is here" into account. Cloud was even the last character shown before this motto appeared with Snake's return. The lead-up to the game's release featured a number of commemorative artworks counting down to the day of Ultimate's debut, and among those came from Tetsuya Nomura himself. Posting from FF7 Remake's PR account of all places, his art was celebrating the 7 days remaining for Smash Ultimate. It portrayed Cloud hanging out with Mario and Link as Kirby appears at the top, making a parallel to Meteor as conveyed in FF7's logo. Quite a positive atmosphere, especially with the port of FF7 for Switch being announced so little time prior. Despite all of this, the way FF7 returned to Smash was rather unexpected. Every character in the roster had a significant selection of spirits and/or music for their home franchises, and that selection had a number of new additions with Ultimate. Every new DLC character in Smash 4 saw expanded representation. Cloud was the exception to all of this. Final Fantasy VII maintained a measly 2 tracks for its music selection, with just 2 spirits to boot, the 2 main alts for Cloud. That was even less than the amount of trophies the franchise had in the previous game, and to make matters worse, none of Cloud's spirits were art from FF7 or Advent Children. Although honestly, I'm not complaining over the latter case. No new characters, nothing from FF7's rich universe found its way into the base game of Smash Ultimate. Even in the World of Light cutscenes, Cloud was nowhere to be seen. This fueled the narrative, which many in the Smash fandom believed, that Square was willingly holding back content out of distaste for Nintendo, or, in their own intelligent words, out of Square Enix's stinginess with their IPs in general. Such misinformed perspective would further drive misunderstandings from data miners, who claimed Cloud wasn't present in World of Light, on top of just plain fake news by quote-unquote insiders, claiming Cloud was the last character to be added in the game. This spread like wildfire throughout the Smash speculation community and the media. I know, not the brightest mindset, but it's a relevant situation among the fandom which would be addressed later down the line by Sakurai himself. It was a scenario that justified the lack of faith many had on FF7's representation, ending up deserving of the work's legacy. It also led people to express outright denial on any chance even existing for Sephiroth joining Smash, despite being among the most popular requests in Japan. Was this perspective well justified though? Looking at World of Light's campaign, Cloud was actually playable and unlocked in a later portion of the story called World of Dark. In fact, he holds the position of the Guardian of the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda, a major mandatory part of the main quest. Cloud is also one of only 3 non-Nintendo characters that are necessary to complete the story, and is one of the 3 non-Nintendo characters in a cast of 8 whose clones comprise the final swarm of fighters the corrupt entities of light and darkness used to their bidding near the end of the campaign. That's a major presence despite the absence in cutscenes. And said absence wasn't exclusive to Cloud, as other major characters were in a similar situation. With regards to Cloud being the last character added, folks don't need to look further than Sakurai's comments on the roster, in which he confirms Incineroar from Pokemon was the only fighter not in the project plans, and thus the last character added by proxy. And with Ultimate's speculation cycle already finished by the time of writing this script, I hope folks watching this already learned the lesson of quote-unquote insiders and leakers being attention-seeking figures that aren't reliable sources of information by any stretch of the imagination. Their accounts aren't evidence to any serious person. To conclude on a symbolic level, I think the state of Cloud's value to Nintendo and Smash is illustrated by Ultimate's key artworks. In the full version of the game's cover art, right beside Mario, Nintendo's mascot, is the FF7 protagonist, the closest position to center out of any non-Nintendo character. He's even with Mega Man here, arguably the other big Nintendo favorite among third parties. In the Everyone is Here mural, you can also see Cloud close to center, right beside Pikachu, a position he held up to the mural's final iteration. I'll get back to this art later, don't worry. Finally, in the Classic Mode mural that, from left to right, illustrates the chosen difficulty level, Cloud is in the frame of the highest difficulty facing the most menacing foe up front, in the most advanced position of all non-Nintendo characters. Again, these are small tidbits, but ones that carry significant symbolic meaning. Needless to say, Cloud's role in Ultimate was far more meaningful than initially assumed. His popularity was also too big to ignore, with Sakurai acknowledging Cloud being the most used character in Ultimate's online matches. All that was really missing was the content that represented the universe of Final Fantasy VII further. And with the announcement of Ultimate getting DLC in the form of new characters, it started to make sense why. The Fighter's Pass was a set of packs for new characters to come, each featuring a stage of their own, a selection of new music, a Mii costume wave releasing alongside it, and a Spirit Board, basically a batch of new spirits tied to the character joining the roster. If major gaps in representation in these areas were present in the base game for a particular franchise, it was very likely this content was being saved for a Fighter's Pass character. And as we would see throughout the years, this logic proved useful. The first Fighter's Pass featured 5 characters, and indeed, one of the characters was from Square Enix. But rather than FF7, Dragon Quest got the spotlight with Hero. The amount of content brought to the game was greater than Cloud's, with 4 different protagonists represented through 4 pairs of alts, 8 spirits, and a selection of 8 tracks, 2 for each game that each protagonist came from. Quick side note though, I get that they were promoting Dragon Quest XI through Hero, but not choosing Erdrick from Dragon Quest III as the main alt in favor of Luminary never felt right to me, especially given his icon status and legacy. Hopefully the situation is done justice in the next Smash title. Back to where we were, despite the improvement in volume of content, the way Hero's DLC pack turned out wasn't enough to end the narrative of Square's stinginess to some fans. They believed each Dragon Quest protagonist featuring 2 tracks was a reflection of Cloud's number of tracks, and thus, it was proof of a company policy from Square regarding their collaborations. On top of this, the music selection featured no remixes, and in the Mii Wave Accompany Hero, none of the Miis from Cloud's Smash 4 release returned. I don't need to reiterate how misguided this perspective was, but the lack of the Final Fantasy related Miis was certainly intriguing. While some saw it as a sign of Square's stinginess, others realized it was a premise for the future. Square Enix's participation in the past was over, but a second Fighter's Pass was revealed as the first one was nearing its end. The door was open for another Square Enix character to appear, and with the missing Final Fantasy Miis, this possibility was becoming a realistic outcome. The following year saw the second Fighter's Pass have its first 2 characters unveiled, both being characters from companies who already participated in the first Fighter's Pass. This raised the prospect of a second Square Enix DLC character to many. On top of this, new spirits were being added in the game through spirit events, and among them were 2 Square Enix events highlighting major releases on the Switch generation by that point, those being the Trials of Mana remake and Octopath Traveler. Final Fantasy VII's missing content was still nowhere to be seen despite the allusions to Sephiroth on numerous occasions throughout Ultimate's publicity. Considering the history surrounding Smash in relation to FF7, the context of Square's relationship with Nintendo in this era, especially with the original Final Fantasy VII finally releasing on a Nintendo system, the likelihood of the fallen soldier joining the roster was unparalleled to those who managed to see this all coming together. On December 10th, 2020, on the same stage that saw the reveal of the very first DLC character for Smash Ultimate, the qualms over the odd absence of FF7 content were finally put to rest, as Sephiroth made his powerful and triumphant debut to Super Smash Bros.
Sephiroth is in Smash. Like, Cloud was already so crazy. it's Cloud. Oh my gosh, Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. It's the kind of thing that you'd tell your kid self and they wouldn't believe you. But now just like going one step further. One step further, Sephiroth is in Smash. That feels even more bizarre than saying Cloud is in Smash. By a degree of like 10 somehow, because Cloud is the iconic character, Sephiroth, he's the villain, I don't know. And I love that they're still willing to dig deep into these characters that just resonate with people. Final Fantasy VII was such a massive, massive deal. So many millions of people. It means so much to them. And so it's another one of those picks that made so many people scream and jump up and down.
Alas, we've reached the final chapter of our journey. All of the history explored, from the aftermath of FF7's 1997 release to Nintendo and the rise of Super Smash Bros., up to the historic debut of FF7 on Switch and the game's representation in Smash Ultimate's release, it all built up to this moment. And with this knowledge in mind, I imagine you'll be able to grasp the full magnitude of this event, not just for Smash history, but, more importantly, its meaning to Final Fantasy VII's legacy. I'll now be breaking down Sephiroth's content in Smash from reveal to release. As this segment ends, I'll provide the closing statements and conclude this Encore journey. And with that, let's commence. Almost like a continuation to Heroes' trailer, Sephiroth's reveal aimed thematically at integrating Smash's story and universe into the introduction of character. Right off the bat, we can point at the antithesis being built by the trailers for the Square Enix characters. The Dragon Quest protagonists have a long history of contribution to defining the archetypes and writing tendencies for heroes and epic stories in the medium for generations. It is for this reason that they act symbolically as the Force of Light to assist Link in surviving the events taking place in the World of Dark. While no direct interaction occurs between the heroes and Darkon, the entity of tyrannical darkness in the story, it is clear they are meant to be symbolic foils to each other. This scenario contrasts with the trailer for the FF7 antagonist. As mentioned previously in The Living Legacy, Sephiroth is a historical landmark of villainy portrayed in video games. He is often regarded as one of the most memorable antagonists in the medium, and has arguably served as inspiration for other villains that would be created over the years in Japanese media, in one form or another in varying degrees. And in this story-focused movie, Sephiroth acts as the Force of Darkness and the foil to Galeem, the entity of tyrannical light, amidst events taking place in the World of Light, attacking all Smash heroes rather than assisting them like Erdrick and company did. But perhaps the most interesting connection between these trailers is actually what they share in common. These are the only character reveal films in Ultimate based on the game's story. Well, at least directly anyways. They aren't thematically reliant on their own source material or entirely unrelated scenarios, but rather they're organically tied to the lore of this Nintendo crossover and the conflict that establishes Ultimate's story. This approach reflects a story-focused experience iconic to Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest's identity, bringing them into a position in Smash's continuity that might be indicative of their value and meaning to Nintendo and Sakurai himself as the director of these films. One can connect the two reveals also by Erdrick's presence in the opening frame of Sephiroth's film. Him being such a focus in the first shot and amidst the cast in the story can also be seen as a reverence to Square's legacy that the character being revealed would also similarly appeal to. Differently from the focus on the Luminary in the hero reveal trailer for promotional reasons, this one chooses to feature the protagonist of arguably the most legacy-heavy Dragon Quest title to this day. And alas, the iteration of Sephiroth being featured here follows that trend. Instead of resorting to the most recent version of the character present in Remake, Nintendo's crossover seems to have opted for the original incarnation of Sephiroth. You can tell this immediately by the character design, more specifically through the drastically angular hairbangs rather than the curvy ones in post-OG FF7, how the hairbangs themselves are significantly uneven in length, and how his facial design looks closer to the stylized look of the original compared to the more androgynous look Sephiroth had in works like Advent Children. It is the legacy-heavy iteration of Sephiroth that was chosen for Smash, even if the costume design is taken from the FF7 film. It might be just a coincidence, but at least this parallel exists between the representation choices for Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest in this review film. Going back to the trailer itself, a major thing to highlight is its attempt at conveying as much as possible the power and threat Sephiroth poses, a superhuman presence that forces a position of superiority over everything and everyone else. And it does so as a defining tool to establish who this character is and the role he inherits from his source material. This is neatly encapsulated by Sephiroth being the entity who one-shots what was the biggest threat to all heroes in the story, giving them a false sense of hope. A false messiah, if you will. Eventually, he proves to be a worse threat than Galeem and its Master Hand army as he solos almost the entire cast. It's a power dynamic that is reminiscent of the quasi-force of nature entity he represented in FF7, and it gives a taste of the brutality the villain is known for. It's also important to point out the take on Sephiroth that Smash has in the review trailer compared to the compilation in terms of goals and priorities. His narcissistic superiority complex takes center stage as he aims for supremacy in this dying universe and directs his attention to the Smash cast as his main foes, belittling their resistance as pathetic. He isn't obsessed with Cloud and Cloud alone like he is in Advent Children, Dissidia, and Remake. Instead, he aimed at overpowering Galeem and, in his words, bring despair to Smash. He takes almost the entire cast down before aiming for Mario and using him as bait for Cloud. If it were the compilation, Cloud would have been targeted from the start and his goal would focus less on bringing despair to Smash and more to the FF7 protagonist mainly. It's an attention to detail that is immensely ironic due to the trailer's inspiration. Yes, it's time to address the Advent Children influence. If you look at Sakurai's presentation of Sephiroth, as well as other publications surrounding the FF7 antagonist in Smash, you will often hear how Advent Children served as the tone setter and inspiration for the character's reveal. In fact, on the topic of the trailer specifically, Sakurai recalled in a retrospective for Nintendo how it was designed to match the, quote, impact of FF7 Advent Children. What kind of impact he meant wasn't specified, but it can be inferred he meant how FF7 AC made a strong impression in terms of its flashy visuals. And this influence shows, as Sephiroth's reveal features a number of shots that parallel the final battle in Advent Children, with a deliberate attempt in the pre-rendered cutscenes to match the color grading iconic to that scene. But amidst that AC inspiration lies the irony of how the end product came out in comparison to the approach that feature film went with. Despite the final battle in Advent Children serving as reference, the conflict taking place in Smash ended up being a more grounded version of that scene, without much Matrix-styled flying and buildings or gigantic boulders being thrown around, other than Cloud's Omni/version 5 at the end. This assessment includes the gameplay abstracting the story and cutscenes, a direction not often seen in Smash reviews either. This comparatively grounded style actually makes it feel closer to battles depicted in Final Fantasy VII, which is ironic considering Smash's more fantastical universe compared to the one in the compilation of FF7. Yes, it's unfortunate that Cloud shows up in a beautiful CG Smash trailer based on his AC design rather than his iconic original design, but at least it manages to depict Sephiroth in his original iteration and the far better version of the climactic fight from Advent Children. And it's also relevant to note that it at least adopts an interesting choice for continuity, with Cloud being portrayed here without the sleeve hiding his arm with the armband in memory of Aerith. Instead of using the standard Advent Children design, Smash conveys the version of the character that has moved on from his oddly emo days and openly embraces the living memory of a loved one, a gesture shared by Cloud's friends in that film. A small detail, but one that is preferable rather than just appealing to the worst parts of a low point in the franchise. I still pray for the day we see OG Cloud though. To close off the review film, I want to list a couple of small details that made Sephiroth's unveiling even more special, going from minor to major features. First, the use of angelic imagery through Pit and Galeem as a premise before the big reveal is a nice touch that builds up to Sephiroth as the fallen angel. Hints are sometimes given before reveal payoffs, but few were this subtle. Next, we have Banjo taking the focus of the shot immediately before the one where One Winged Angel starts playing. His presence here is probably an unintentional but interesting parallel to the role Final Fantasy VII had to a number of generations of Nintendo fans. In the West, most of the new Nintendo fans of the very late 90s generation, in other words, the ones who grew up with the Nintendo 64 as their first Nintendo console, saw Banjo as a beloved icon to them. His IP would eventually leave Nintendo after Rare was bought by Microsoft. Smash Ultimate would be the moment Banjo was brought back to a Nintendo experience for the first time in almost 20 years. While Final Fantasy VII was a more traumatic experience, comparatively speaking, this scenario shares a lot of similarities with Squaresoft's 1997 classic. With Sephiroth being the character to effectively define FF7's representation and presence in Smash, Banjo being here seems to be a poetic detail, albeit likely being unintentional. Perhaps the biggest aspect that strengthens this reveal film is its callbacks to the original Final Fantasy VII. Right after Sephiroth threatens to give despair to Smash, we get a direct callback to the iconic cutscene of the Nibelheim incident. This was done through the villain's victory screen, transitioning into Sephiroth as he stands in Ganon's arena, a stage surrounded by ruins under fire. Another story callback is the famous scene of Aerith's death in the Forgotten City, with Zelda playing the role of Aerith once again after two references in Ultimate and Smash 4. The stage choices also seem to mostly parallel FF7 locations, most specifically Mount Nibel, Shinra HQ's top floor exterior, Midgar, the interior of the Temple of the Ancients, Shinra Mansion, Great Glacier, Cave of the Gi Tribe, Forgotten City, Cosmo Canyon, and of course, the Great Crater, which is Sephiroth's stage for Smash. Finally, a small callback to Yuffie and Vincent can be seen in this sequence where Greninja, a Pokemon with ninja traits famous for his shurikens, and Bayonetta, a lady who is known for her gunplay and has strong associations to bats and demons, face Sephiroth here. I say this, but Yuffie and Vincent's spirit battle features Sheik and Wolf respectively. You could say there's more than one option for representing them, or I'm just looking too much into this, who knows. Alright, we got the review trailer out of the way, and we now move on to Sephiroth's release. It's time to break down the villain's challenger pack. Since we were previously exploring the topic of AC representation, I might as well highlight the remaining aspects that tie into the film. The One Wing from Advent Children is present as Sephiroth's comeback mechanic, a spawn of his Last Stand state. While I prefer the wing as a part of Sephiroth's god form to enhance the transcendental nature of it, the wing in Advent Children is not a bad symbolic choice to tie to the legendary soldier, something I quickly touched upon in A Living Legacy, so this choice isn't really harmful to the character's representation per se. The same goes for the Masamune, whose hilt changed from FF7's red to Advent Children's black. At that point, it's just a color preference, and if I were to give my take on it, the black and golden hilt fits Sephiroth a lot better. In terms of moves, you have only up tilt referencing the stabs in the complete version of the film's final battle. The rest of Advent Children representation can be summarized by the 3 tracks from the film being part of his music selection, and the famous "I'll never be a memory" line that can be heard in the review trailer and Sephiroth's victory screen if Cloud is among the defeated characters. As you can see, it's a pretty small amount. However, another compilation title and Dissidia would still get representation. As you may be aware, we see very little of Sephiroth fighting in his human self in Final Fantasy VII, so the pool of moves to take from is far smaller than in Cloud's case. In this situation, Sakurai and his team looked to different sources of inspiration to complete his moveset. Ehrgeiz, Dissidia, and Kingdom Hearts 2 would provide the main chunk of moves to supplement Smash Originals, and even then, some of the moves inspired by these works function in a unique way to Smash. Personally, I like to look at it as Smash conveying what these moves would look like if the original Sephiroth performed them. Outside of the moveset itself, we likely have only one alt that references Crisis Core. Don't worry, I'll quickly cover Sephiroth's alt soon. Before that, let's analyze Sephiroth's moveset in more detail to highlight its origins. Starting with his normals, it's quite interesting how much was carried over, or was adapted slightly, from Ehrgeiz. His jabs 1, 2, and 3 are his first 2 hits of Ancient Peace, followed by hilt attack. Down tilt is almost identical to slide charge, and side tilt is very similar to Cruel Strike. The only normal not from Ehrgeiz is up tilt, referencing Advent Children as previously mentioned. Looking at aerials, all of them except back air and down air are Smash originals. Back air is Flying Airstrike from Ehrgeiz, while down air is Hell's Gate, seen in one of Final Fantasy VII's most impactful moments. In terms of Smash attacks, Side Smash is identical to Sephiroth's attack animation from FF7, his Down Smash is the final hit of Hellquake Slash from Ehrgeiz, and Up Smash is a Smash original. His special moves feature more complex origins. Neutral B is a 3-tier flare, magic used by Sephiroth in the original game, albeit Mega Flare and Giga Flare weren't seen used by Sephiroth specifically in the source material. They are, however, larger scale magic used by Bahamut and Nel Bahamut in FF7, so it's an interesting allusion to his power level in that game. Down B is Scintilla, first introduced in the City of Final Fantasy, and it is a barrier inspired by the Genova Cell symbol palette introduced in Advent Children. Its mechanics, however, are original to Smash. Side B is Shadow Flare, a spell cast by Absolute Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII. Its workings may be mostly original to Smash, but it's relevant to point to them preserving a core detail of the move in the original, which is about circling magic spheres that close into an enemy in a dark explosion. Up B covers 2 moves, which one being performed depends on whether the player holds B or not. If B is not held, Sephiroth executes Flash, incorrectly localized as Blade Dash, a move originating from Kingdom Hearts 2. You can tell not only visually, but both moves share the same name in Japanese, Isen. If B is held, the villain performs Octaslash, a signature move debuting in Crisis Core, but its execution matches far more closely its precursor move known as Continuous Slash from Kingdom Hearts 2. Given Flash's origin, it's likely the intent was to pull specifically from Kingdom Hearts 2 rather than Crisis Core, which is interesting considering Sephiroth in Kingdom Hearts is a completely different character from his original counterpart.
Ain't Sephiroth the one who's supposed to be the dark part of Cloud's heart?
Did Cloud tell you that?
Oh boy. Since we're talking about Octaslash, here's a cool trivia for you. The original name in Japanese, Hatou Isen, is built off from Flash, the name of the Kingdom Hearts move. The extra kanji mean, respectively, 8 and blade or katana. The likely name for the iconic move seems to actually be Octo Flash Blade. Octaslash is a cool name, but it's definitely one that localizers at Square Enix took significant creative liberties with. As you can see, Sephiroth's special moves have complex origins, a lot of them with Smash original interpretations. Finally, Sephiroth's final smash is Supernova, the FF7 villain's most iconic spell. Given Ultimate's design choice of keeping final smashes to be cinematic attacks of short duration, Supernova was summarized immensely. But it still fittingly holds the title of the longest final smash in the game, almost like an ironic allusion to Supernova's infamously long animation in the final version of FF7. Despite the move having its duration being shortened significantly, it's worth mentioning the attention to detail in it. The move can only land on a maximum amount of 3 opponents who end up facing Absolute Sephiroth, a reference to the party configuration from Final Fantasy VII. The shot composition here was also made identical to the one seen in the source material, already analyzed in detail in the Living Legacy. I personally appreciate the way they brought back Peter Appian's geocentric celestial spheres. The diagram in Latin you see opened the supernova sequence in the original. You might recall in the Living Legacy that I highlighted the employment of this geocentric diagram not only serving as the introduction symbol to the following astrophysics spectacle, but also how it embodies Sephiroth's state of existence in that part of the story. To be more specific, I mentioned how Sephiroth's own narcissistic and misguided perspective of him being the center of everything is embodied by the geocentric perspective symbolized by Appian's diagram, which is essentially putting man in the center of the universe. Super Smash Bros. Adds to this concept by making an interesting composition choice of fading in Appian's celestial spheres behind Absolute Sephiroth himself, in a way that the villain finds himself at its center, overlapping with the planet at the core of the universe. Brilliant detail from Sakurai's team. Another new aspect of Smash's version of Supernova is the set of equations shown in the background as the asteroid flies into the sun. I mentioned previously in the Living Legacy how the original FF7 showed equations of astrophysics as a way to convey its laws being bent by Sephiroth in this illusory and psychological attack. Super Smash Bros. Replaced those astrophysics equations with 9 new equations. Now, I'm merely an engineer and not really a physicist, so I might be missing something relevant here. We can see major equations like the Einstein field equation, the Schrödinger equation, and the Hellman-Feynman theorem covering quantum mechanics and geometry of space-time, which are coherent to what supernova should demand for it to be performed. But there are equations related to electric circuits and moving fluids that don't match the scene. This makes me believe that the equations weren't as organized and thought out as they were in the original version, but I still think it's still a noble idea to portray an expansion of the fields of physics that Absolute Sephiroth bends to perform supernova. It's a bold move to attempt at enriching the iconic spell with additional equations, rather than just imparting the ones used in FF7. Boldness still doesn't redeem the flaw here though, and I wish these could have been more accurate. Not simply out of my engineer habit of pushing for correct equations, but also because the source material took the care to make it accurate, and Sakurai's philosophy behind Smash is precisely to aim for accuracy as much as possible. If I missed anything however, please comment down below. I'll make sure to add a note correcting this assessment. To close off this topic, a detail that was very intentionally put into Smash's version of this finishing move is the wide range of status effects an opponent can get, a direct reference to the original Supernova also inflicting status effects on top of brutal damage, something Sakurai also called attention to in his presentation of Sephiroth. In conclusion, looking at the general moveset and how Sephiroth is played on an optimal level, it's worth highlighting how the character was designed in terms of gameplay in relation to his source material. Not only is his moveset filled with material that would match his original self well, but he is also fundamentally a very difficult character to master, with a toolset that relies on constant marksman precision, and I find that to be a very apt depiction of Sephiroth's own capabilities in FF7. Few could truly grasp the fact that the magnitude of his skill and his mastery in combat was being reflected in the demand for precision to optimize his neutral and combo game. It is the kind of detail that is most likely an intentional way of the Smash team to represent the character accurately. This isn't the kind of abstract detail that would make this kind of reading as something far-fetched, by the way. Mario himself is well known for being an all-around character designed to be very easy to pick up and play, but challenging to master, meant to parallel the mainline Super Mario titles themselves in terms of gameplay. Alright, with the moveset done, I can talk about the villain's render and his alts. As mentioned previously, the Sephiroth we see in Smash is based on the original version of the character, with minor Advent Children additions. The reference to the original FF7 can be seen in both the standard and alternate renders. The standard iteration is a reference to Sephiroth's victory pose in his source material, with the caveat of holding the sword with his left hand because of his wing being on the right side. The alternate render is based on his final encounter at the planet's core, down to the battle stance Sephiroth takes in the final battle in FF7. His other alts are also mainly based on entities from the source material. The second alt possesses a purple hue that references Genova. The other 4 standard costume alts are based, respectively, on Emerald, Ruby, Diamond, and Sapphire weapons, the entities from the planet that awaken as Sephiroth acquires the Black Materia. Finally, we have the 2 shirtless alts, with the non-standard one being up for debate. It is often accepted that it represents Genesis from Crisis Core, despite him not wearing trousers of this color. But another candidate, one I can see a case for, is President Shinra, a man who wore this exact color in FF7. You make up your mind on that one, fair viewer. As you can see, Sephiroth already carried a lot of his original game's history with just his moveset, review film, render, and alts. It's time to visit the rest of the content that came with Sephiroth's pack and see how far that reverence goes. The musical selection that came with Sephiroth was substantial compared to last time. 9 tracks in total, with 4 of those being new remixes, finally putting an end to the misguided notion from certain Smash fans that Square Enix was being stingy with Nintendo and prohibiting Smash from getting remixes. Sakurai would even reiterate the fact that folks had this misconception with music, calling attention to how there are many other parties involved that need to provide approval for use of music. Ironic props to Nintendo of America for omitting Sakurai directly referencing it wasn't Square's fault.
今まで FF 曲というのは2曲だけだったんですね。 それをして机にさんはケチだというような話をする人もいるかと思うんですが、それは違うんですよと大きな声で言わせていただきます。
Definitely what the fans needed in order to understand the situation. Back to where we were, the other major point about the music selection is the 3 Advent Children tracks. This is the first time that music that debuted primarily in a film is included in Smash Bros. And I think it's relevant to remember how music distribution rights for films tend to be even trickier and more expensive to license than game music on average. With all this effort put into the selection, it's unfortunate to say that the weakest aspect of the entire set of FF7 content is the chosen Advent Children music, and my one criticism to Smash's approach to FF7 representation. And I don't say this because I'm against any Advent Children representation in the game, although I'd also admit that such timeline would have been preferable. I say this because 2 of the 3 chosen tracks are essentially unrecognizable remixes of songs already present since Smash 4, taking the spots from missing important songs like Birth of a God and Genova Absolute from the original Final Fantasy VII. But perhaps the most egregious facet to it is that when remembering Advent Children's historical significance to Smash and beyond, it's baffling to see none of the tracks were the ones conducted by Taizo Takemoto. In fact, the 2 Advent Children tracks I'd pick outside Advent One Winged Angel would be both of the Divinity tracks, not just because of their style being closer to FF7 rather than Black Mage's covers, but also due to Takemoto-san, the man who likely bridged Nintendo to FF7 artists, was responsible for those performances. It's a musical choice that would provide the story behind the scenes a poetic closure. I guess you can't win them all. With that said, let's proceed with Sephiroth's stage, classic mode, and spirit board.
次にステージのご紹介です。北の大空洞というステージを作りました。ステージの形状自体はシンプルにしましたが、背景がストーリーを追うようになってるんですね。これなんと FF7 の終盤の展開を含んでしまいます。しょうがないけど。なのでこれネタバレを見たくないという方は回れ右をした方がいいかも、いやしなくてもいいかも。何しろ20数年前のゲームですからね。まあそれに新しいリメイクでこのようになるとは限らないということなので、まあ見ていただければ幸いです。
The Northern Cave is a love letter to Final Fantasy VII, and, as we'll see, one of the most polished stages in Smash to date. It conveys the ending to the original game, going through detailed 3D recreations of the game's final dungeon and a summarized version of the journey to the planet's core and the final stand against world annihilation from Meteor. The attention to detail put into the stage isn't trivial in the slightest. Allow me to highlight all the relevant features to illustrate this. Let's start with the opening. It is no secret that Meteor Fall is often considered to be the symbol of Sephiroth's stage, being the focus of the story cycle's final phase. But if you pay attention to the background in the first few seconds of battle, you'll see Meteor is also seen here. And what's worth noting is its depiction being very similar to the red ominous figure looming the skies over the world map in FF7's final 2 acts. From the onset, we can also point to the theming of the platforms and the stage itself matching the terrain of the landmass the party fights Genova Synthesis in FF7, a landmass which can be seen in the background after reaching the planet's interior here. The cubes and pillars that float in the back part of the stage as soon as the battle begins can be seen dismantling away in the same manner and instant as the dismantling of the Genova Synthesis platform, further driving that thematic tie home. I also want to praise the Mako scene flowing from the floor here in between the pillars. I say this not only for its beauty, but also for its portrayal in relation to its surroundings. The platform's Mako actually changes color and intensity based on its proximity to a Mako source. It starts off with a pale green before closing in and descending into the dungeon. Once the stage reaches the depths of the crater, you can see it gradually shining a strong tint of green. However, once it reaches Holy or when it leaves the crater, it loses the color and intensity it had and returns to its earlier state. In a subtle manner, the stage conveys Mako charging the environment with its own energy, which is a literal depiction of the original game's concept of the lifestream being the planet's self-vitalizing source of energy. Smash Bros.' portrayal here is original. FF7 didn't show this detail with platforms like this, but it's an idea that is coherent to an extent to the source material. It being subdued like this makes this detail all the cooler once you notice it. Great job here. Next, the layout of the background within the crater matches a number of screens in FF7, like the spiraling pillars in the distance here being the same ones here, and the platforms here with the cave on the right lying just above the entrance of the inner layer of the planet. Holy, the red organic material sealing it, and the 8 rocks surrounding them are organized and designed identical to their original counterparts. The stage's perspective almost perfectly mirrors the shot in the original FF7. There is the interesting addition of the background here compared to the original. It seems like the Mako concentration in the background is the external and physical version of the planet's core. The lighting throughout the environment is defined by the quasi-pulsating movement of the livestream in the core, alluding to it being the beating heart of the planet. It's a new detail that adds atmosphere and aligns with the original game's ideas and lore. Looking at the rest of the experience, it's worth noting that the Highwind's appearance accurately matches its state in each part of the story sequence. Its second form shows up in the opening segment before entering the crater, while the third and final form appears briefly after Holy leaves the crater. The Highwind logo and the Lady Luck are also present in their full glory as seen here. On the topic of the Highwind, it's relevant to point it as an elegant way of conveying a supporting cast of characters without actually showing them as a cameo. Smash Ultimate's DLC stages prior to the Northern Cave had the custom of including on stage certain characters from the source material as cameos. That concept would have been great for seeing more beloved FF7 characters with the classic visual treatment, but unfortunately it would clash with the story-oriented approach Sephiroth stage had. In the end, keeping in mind that the party is in the ship every time it's on screen, the Highwind serves as a symbolic cameo of the supporting FF7 cast. As you might tell now, the work put into Sephiroth's stage showcases the aforementioned character detail. It's not perfect by any means, of course. Things like the cyclones being formed close to the crater instead of Midgar, and how you can't see the ocean around the crater despite it being part of a peninsula are obvious examples, but these are very few and are far outweighed by the stage's strengths. Among those, one of my favorites is how it concludes its story cycle. The original Final Fantasy VII had an open-ended conclusion where a meteor being stopped by the livestream isn't shown in detail and the audience is left with the question of whether humanity was spared by the planet or not. That climactic open-ended conclusion built a massive part of FF7's impact, and it's no exaggeration to say that any attempt at recreating FF7's ending needs to get this execution right. When looking at Super Smash Bros., it's evident Sakurai and his team opted to follow a faithful take with the depiction of the story. Right as we see the livestream reaching Meteor and starting to push it upwards, we get to see a shining light that consumes the entire background, much like the perspective of what Cloud and company see in the final seconds of the game. Indeed, the stage doesn't show what happens to the world after the light, mirroring the open-ended nature of the source material. It's a splendid experience and a fantastic job by Sakurai and his team. The cycle is reset as the light transitions into the stage's starting point. Don't worry, this is just a gameplay and presentation motivated cycle, not that kind. It goes without saying, but it should be clear by now how Smash fully embraced storytelling as being a central part of Final Fantasy VII's identity. The appeal to narrative and it being a unique trait to the Northern Crater was even highlighted by Sakurai himself during his presentation on Sephiroth. This is further reflected, in quite a subtle manner, when selecting the stage. The preview image shown when selecting it changes to different parts of the story according to the form chosen, be it normal, Omega, and Battlefield, the only stage in the game to feature this variation. The Northern Cave is truly something special. On a more Smash-focused aspect, the stage possesses a neutral competitive format, which is a rarity to come by and is a contrast to Midgar's hazardous experience with its summons. The layout is unique in size and scope, featuring a symmetric positioning of 2 platforms over a large floating landmass that is reminiscent of Final Destination in geometry. This uniqueness is further compounded by a smaller blast zone layout compared to other stages. To Final Fantasy fans not familiar with Smash, blast zones are the limits to the stage off-screen where characters lose a life if said limits are crossed. With such a polished stage being neutral enough for competitive play, it's a given that the Northern Cave would be adopted by the Smash competitive scene in major tournaments. Wait, what? It's banned? What more excuses can the Smash community possibly make to not include it in the stage list? Oh. Okay, let me quickly address these to make the case for Northern Cave's legality, because I think it's important for its exposure to Smash players and competitive fans. Let's look at the first argument. FF7 tracks being cause for music distributors to copyright claim streams of tournaments. As previously explained, indeed, distributors are often intolerant when using FF7 music in videos and streams, but their power is basically non-existent over the Smash remixes, so you can use those tracks relatively safely. Next is the argument of Northern Cave being quote-unquote too similar to Kalos. What you now see on screen is an image detailing the geometry of the stages and platforms, as well as the camera scope and blast zones, all overlaid on top of each other. The lines in white are the commonalities between stages. As you can probably tell, these two stages are significantly different, much in the same way Yoshi's Story is to Battlefield. Northern Cave lacks the walls from Kalos, featuring lowered platforms closer to center stage and a smaller perimeter of blast zones compared to the Pokemon stage. It also features the lowest ceiling of all stages in Ultimate. This stage provides a fundamentally different experience, being much harder to recover, combos starting and connecting easier from below platforms, and the smaller space within blast zones making matches a lot less susceptible to a timeout, a strategy often seen used in Kalos. In conclusion, the Kalos argument is downright embarrassing, and especially hypocritical in regions with stage lists featuring both Battlefield and Yoshi's Story, a pair of stages with some similar parallels to what we just explored. Finally, the last two arguments, both related to the stage's visuals. The first of them is, and I quote, "The background is too distracting." Yes, you heard that right, folks. We're at a point now where a stage being so polished, so detailed, and outright gorgeous is enough for some players to use it as justification to their lower performance. I'm not even going to mention other busy looking stages used in the past. This is either just a skill issue or a very low effort excuse from some players who wish to ban the stage. Now for the second argument, that the movement leaving the crater and lights can make someone dizzy. This is the only argument I see being somewhat reasonable to make. But, in context to Smash Bros. And its competitive history, it can also be perceived as a bit naive. By Smash standards, the Northern Cave is tame, with only a single intense moment that pales in comparison to stages like Final Destination in Smash 4 and Brawl, as well as Lilac Cruise, a stage present in competitive scenes for generations now. Ignoring the fact that Smash has come with warnings of flashes of light since Melee, players who aren't happy with Northern Cave due to motion and visual issues can still make a gentleman's agreement with their opponent about it. In conclusion, this stage doesn't warrant this many hurdles to be legal, and the arguments against it are frail to say the least. There's no excuse to keeping it banned. Legalize Northern Cave. Alright, we've concluded analyzing Sephiroth's stage, so now I think it's a good time to briefly explore his classic mode. To the uninitiated, classic mode in Smash Ultimate is defined by a sequence of battles that is themed around a character, ending on a boss battle often associated to said theme or home franchise the character in question hails from. As an example, Cloud's classic mode, named A Ride? Not Interested, is themed around Cloud's motion sickness, which is humorously conveyed by having all stages take place in moving vehicles and platforms ranging from the Great Fox and the platform following the Halberd to the Rainbow Cruise and F-Zero vehicles racing in Big Blue. Sephiroth's path in this mode doesn't feature battles directly symbolizing plot lines of his source material, differently from the villain's content explored thus far. The only instance of FF7 story representation is seen even before Sephiroth's debut, when the villain was referenced in Mewtwo's classic mode, a path thematically based on mind control and featuring a fight against Cloud and Midgar. Instead of going for a story-focused path, Sephiroth got a rather special treatment compared to other characters. His classic mode, titled Those Who Rule, is a boss rush, highlighting Sephiroth's legacy as both a medium-defining villain and a brutal boss in FF7 and beyond his original game. Keep in mind, this is the only boss rush experience in the entirety of Smash Ultimate, so you can imagine how special this is. With classic mode out of the way, all that remains is Sephiroth Spirit Board. Before we proceed, since we're on the topic of Sephiroth's legacy as a boss, I think it's a good opportunity to make a brief addendum highlighting an important peculiarity surrounding Sephiroth in Smash. Unlike every other DLC fighter before him and since, a challenge event was made prior to the formal release of Sephiroth's pack, where you unlock the villain, his stage, and music selection early if you beat him in a stamina battle in the chosen difficulty. The event was thematically designed with FF7 aesthetics, from sound effects to menu presentation matching the original game's menus and possessing a clear symbol for very hard mode based on Meteor. Well, except the results screen, which is based on FF7 Remake's menu aesthetic. Yeah, not my preferred choice considering the focus Smash chose to go with for this event was on the original game. The Sephiroth Challenge, as the event was called, debuted on December 18, 2020, making Sephiroth's actual release coinciding with the anniversary date of the Final Fantasy series. The FF7 villain coming to Smash was not only a blessing to the legacy of the original 1997 classic, but Smash also painted it as an event heralding Final Fantasy in general and FF7's role to its home series history and impact. This event was a major endeavor from Sakurai and his team, aimed at both highlighting Sephiroth's iconic legacy as a boss and raising hype among fans for the inclusion of the fallen soldier in the roster. It really lands how special the character and his source material were to Smash developers, to the point of going out of their way to exert extra hard work under a tight deadline. With that said, let's explore Sephiroth Spirit Board and extra spirit updates. For the first time in Smash history, a spirit already in the game was retroactively changed. Sephiroth's inclusion made Cloud's standard fighter spirit update to the character's beautiful FF7 artwork. This philosophy of heralding the original Final Fantasy VII through spirits represented by Nomura's 1997 art would extend to Sephiroth's own fighter spirit and spirit board. To put it in context for non-Smash players, spirit boards for DLC packs are a selection of spirits of characters and entities themed around the source material of the fighter the board is tied to, down to the presentation of the board itself. Spirit boards are essentially the extended representation of the universe the DLC fighter belongs in, much in the same vein trophies were in the past. The main menu of the DLC boards is also interesting to draw attention to. Each board has a selectable banner where the most important or iconic character from the source material not in the roster is featured on the far right. Pfft, what the hell is Kairi doing there for Kingdom Hearts? Anyways, in the case of another major character of similar relevance being in that board, said character is featured in the far left of the banner, as seen with Tekken and Kingdom Hearts. As the player is about to select a particular board, the left part of the screen features artwork compiling the main spirits present in said board. With all of this context in mind, let's take a look at Sephiroth's content. Starting with the selectable banner in the main menu, it seems Smash took to heart the original FF7's narrative roles and placed Aerith as the highlight on the right. I'm calling attention to this because it might look weird to younger fans, especially those into the compilation and Dissidia Final Fantasy. But, as stated in The Living Legacy, regardless of whatever people invested in pointless shipping wars might presume, their narrative roles to the story in general for Aerith and Tifa back in 1997 were different from how they are conveyed in later works featuring these characters. Given this video is releasing way earlier than A Living Legacy covers this topic, I'll give you a brief summary of what I mean. Final Fantasy VII had a clear main hero and villain, as many might already know. But in terms of a main heroine, it was kind of a split situation, hence Tifa being with the same level of highlight on the left of the banner here. I say kind of, because after Aerith's death, Tifa takes a lot more mandatory story attention and acts as a subtle replacement to Aerith's role for Cloud and the party. Despite this fact and the absence in Flesh and Blood, Aerith still holds a significant influence over the rest of the adventure, from being a potential guiding force in the livestream to help Tifa rebuild Cloud's identity, to being the summoner of Holy and the conductor of the livestream to save the planet. Aerith opens and ends the story of Final Fantasy VII. This is the character that epitomizes the game's duality of life and death, contributes to the central theme of search for identity both directly and indirectly, and is the centerpiece of the conflict of overcoming loss. And in all these fronts, she propels Cloud as the main protagonist on a narrative level. It is for these reasons that Aerith was, narratively and structurally speaking, the main heroine of FF7. This dynamic changed with later Square works, with Kingdom Hearts 2 establishing Tifa as the antithesis to Sephiroth as the incarnation of Cloud's light, the City of Final Fantasy opting for her as the heroine representative for FF7, and the compilation overall tipping the focus of characters to fulfill this new vision for the franchise. Super Smash Bros. Respects the narrative structure from the original Final Fantasy VII with the banner here, as well as on the board artwork in the main menu to the left here, as Aerith is positioned at the center of the party. With the DLC Spirit Board menu broken down, let's now move on to Sephiroth's actual Spirit Board. With a background of the livestream reaching Meteor and the high wind flying by under the sound of the main theme of FF7, this Spirit Board doubles down on the impact of the game's ending to its legacy. It serves the dual purpose of being a symbol of both FF7's climactic plotline the game's logo references and Sephiroth himself as the one responsible for Meteorfall. The board itself features the largest amount of spirits among the DLC boards, 13 in total, featuring the supporting cast of Final Fantasy VII, the villainous Rufus and the Turks, and some of the game's highlight summons. The cast of FF7 is represented by the original 1997 artworks, while Bahamut Zero features his Smash appearance and the other summons appear in their FF7 remake iteration. Given summons are entities present in multiple FF entries, and Remake conveying a pretty faithful rendition of these characters in terms of design, the choice of sources to pull for the FF7 Spirit Board is staggeringly strong. My only gripe is Hojo and Genova not having spirits themselves, given their ties to Sephiroth and their crucial villainous roles to FF7. Maybe Nomura could have made 1997 styled art of these characters for Smash, like Masatsugu Saito made for Pneuma in the Xenoblade 2 board. That would have been amazing. But hey, at least Smash finally gave us the highest resolution of the 1997 art of the main cast of Final Fantasy VII. Back to where we were, Sephiroth's Spirit Board is organized in 3 categories: the playable party of FF7, the summons, and the villains. What's interesting is the detail put into the playable party section. The party spirits are organized as mandatory characters first, followed by the optional characters, the former being ordered according to their chronological appearance in Cloud's life. This starts with Tifa as Cloud's childhood friend, followed by Barret as Cloud is hired by Avalanche in Midgar, then we have Aerith being met in Sector 8 after the first bombing mission, Red 13 at Shinra headquarters, Kate Sith at the Gold Saucer, and finally Cid at Rocket Town. The optional characters are likely ordered by their main story appearance by home location, with Nibelheim being visited first, followed by Wutai. Why did they put Cid as a novice spirit while the optional members get advanced is beyond me though. To conclude our journey, I'll explore the relevant contents of each spirit battle to highlight the effort put into bringing the universe of the original Final Fantasy VII back to life through Smash Bros. Assets. And with that, let's mosey. Tifa's Spirit Battle features Mii Brawler using the Tifa Mii costume, and the player faces her at Reset Bomb Forest. This is a Kid Icarus stage featuring a town on fire amidst a mountainous range, referencing Nibelheim, Tifa's hometown, as it burned to the ground by Sephiroth's awakening. This moment in the story connects to Tifa strongly in a context of a battle by virtue of it depicting her major standoff against a fallen soldier after losing her father and home. The fight features the brawler prioritizing up smash, a reference to Tifa's somersault limit break, and onslaught, a reference to Tifa's beat rush limit break. The character choice matches Tifa's brawler fighting style and the Final Fantasy monk class she represents in FF7. Barret's Spirit Battle is a stamina one, in reference to FF7's HP-based battle mechanics, and starts with a face-off against a trio of Mii Brawlers using black protective gear in Midgar under the sounds of opening bombing mission. This is meant to reference Avalanche and their first bombing mission on the upper plates of Midgar. These Miis feature designs matching Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, the last of which starts the battle with a Bob-omb on hand, referencing her interest in handling of explosives for Avalanche. To add thematically to the battle against the eco-terrorists, the match has explosive items spawn across the stage over time. After the trio is defeated, Barrett as a Mii Gunner shows up, perhaps his late introduction referencing his habit as a leader to always guarantee the safety of his underlings by being the last to move out as he keeps an eye on all members in their operations. Although in this context, he really left them in an awful situation, didn't he? Next up is Aerith. This spirit battle takes place in the Fountain of Dreams, a reference to the water altar in the Forgotten City, where Aerith meets her end at the hands of Sephiroth. In this match, Cloud joins as Aerith's ally, the only spirit battle to feature any FF7 character from the roster. This is in reference to both Cloud's formal relationship with Aerith as her bodyguard and the FF7 protagonist being closely present witnessing the events at the Forgotten City. When it comes to Aerith's representation, this battle has two versions that are worth exploring. If the player bought Aerith's Mii costume, the Mii sword fighter is used as her stand-in, prioritizing Gale Strike, an offense move that seems to visually parallel Healing Wind, Aerith's first limit break. If the costume isn't available, the FF7 heroine is represented by Zelda in her purple alt, prioritizing Din's Fire, alluding to Aerith's abilities being magic focused and her having high magic stats. Zelda being a stand-in for Aerith is a special detail relevant to Smash's own history of reverence to Final Fantasy VII. Ever since Cloud's review in Smash 4, the Hylian princess symbolized Aerith and has been present alongside Cloud for scene recreations of the original game. This ranged from her meeting Cloud for the first time in the Sector 5 church, to her death in Sephiroth's trailer and her burial scene conveyed by an achievement picture in Smash Ultimate. And it's no coincidence this parallel has been frequently made. Both characters are strongly tied to holy magic, they are heroines that serve as a guiding force for their respective heroes' journeys, have a connection with the divine as understood by their respective worlds, and, in Smash Ultimate's case of having the princess from A Link to the Past, they even share similar hairstyles. Now, the dreadful shippers watching might have been thinking I'm spending this much time on Aerith out of bias, but if you're paying attention, you should realize Sakurai and his team opted for a more thorough representation of her, be it by their own bias, be it by their preference of upholding the original FF7's narrative roles. And I'm merely highlighting what they chose to go with. I think this entire parallel is best illustrated by Smash Ultimate's Everyone is Here banner. Since the very first version, Cloud, in a defense pose, has been positioned in front of Zelda, acting as her bodyguard much in the same manner Cloud did for Aerith. This configuration would persist to the banner's final version, where Sephiroth is already present, looming behind Zelda as he stares menacingly at the audience. It's a subtle, symbolic recreation of the original FF7's lead character dynamics. Concluding Aerith's spirit battle, extra details like Aerith's theme for the music choice and the healing of both opponents further build the thematic portrait of the FF7 heroine. The match ends once the player defeats Aerith, regardless of Cloud being defeated beforehand. Red 13's spirit battle features Duck Hunt as the main opponent in Gerudo Valley, meant to reference Red's homeland, Cosmo Canyon. Its musical theme is fittingly featured here, arranged by Yoko Shimomura of Kingdom Hearts and Super Mario RPG fame. And of all FF7 remixes, I'd say it's by far my personal favorite. Not only for the phenomenal rendition, but also for how close to a live recording it gets, an approach I dearly miss in Smash remixes and most original themes, since Brawl started to adopt more artificial synths for its soundtrack and arrangements. Masahiro Sakurai seems to share my opinion on Cosmo Canyon's quality, going as far as calling it one of the highlight remixes of the entire game, according to a tweet made a little over a year ago. It is quite poetic to have an FF7 remix in Smash be this highly regarded among the dozens upon dozens of remixes in Ultimate, on top of said arrangement being the product of a game composer with the history Yoko Shimomura has. I briefly talked about Kingdom Hearts, a work Shimomura was responsible for musical composition in part 1 of this Encore feature. But her role here is remarkable because, Much like how Kingdom Hearts was a direct result of Nintendo's artistic endeavors with Super Mario, she recently revealed that her own musical career was inspired by Koji Kondo's work in Super Mario Bros. Kondo would end up being one of the 3 most influential composers to her own life, alongside Square Enix legends Nobuo Uematsu and Koichi Sugiyama. In short, Shimomura is yet another artist in Square's history who emblematically displays the long-established artistic bridge between Nintendo and Squaresoft. Her presence in FF7's extensive and impactful representation in Super Smash Bros. Is a well-earned one, and further enriches the event FF7 and Smash represents. Well, I guess I kinda got carried away there with the music when I should be focusing on Red 13's Spirit Battle. But that diversion was necessary. I mean, come on, who doesn't love the Cosmo Canyon theme? Anyways, going back to the battle itself. The match also features speed boosts and weight reduction for higher mobility to Duck Hunt, likely alluding to Red 13 having the highest base dexterity stat in FF7. As the cherry on top, Duck Hunt is able to attack by dashing onto opponents, a direct callback to Sledfang, Red 13's first limit break. Cait Sith's Spirit Battle features Roy from the Super Mario series accompanied by small copies of Mr. Game & Watch in New Park City. The stage references the Gold Saucer, where Cait Sith is first seen in FF7. Roy himself riding a white clown car with an AI of its own to express emotion is a callback to Cait Sith himself, an AI cat riding a large Moogle. Roy was the chosen Koopaling most likely due to his color scheme matching the closest to Cait Sith's general color scheme, mainly his shell matching the Moogle's wings, as well as his defining feature being the cat-eyed sunglasses he wears. The Game & Watch minions serve as a reference to 2 of Cait Sith's limit breaks: the toy soldiers by the mini-minions themselves, and dice through the Game & Watch's priority of Judge, a move involving the character showing a random number as they hit an opponent with a hammer, each providing a different effect to the hit. It's a luck-based move involving numbers, much in the same way dice is in FF7 with its numbers to generate random damage. But the use of Judge here is also interesting for how it serves to illustrate Cait Sith's core mechanical theme of being a character defined by luck. Really interesting to see such a gameplay-centric way of representing character faithfully like this. Next is Cid, a battle against Link in his Royal Guard uniform alt on the halberd. The costume choice was made to match Cid's appearance, while the stage and Meta Knight ship are thematic references to Cid's airship, the Highwind. The battle also features the presence of Jeff from Earthbound as he fires missiles and rockets around the stage. This is a subtle and elegant callback to Cid's love for rockets, his homeland Rocket Town, and Cid's final limit break featuring missiles shot from his airship. One final detail that makes this fight a special nod to Cid is Link jumping often and prioritizing his down aerial attack, a falling stab that visually references Cid's spear and his Dragoon class in Final Fantasy VII. Vincent has a more specific approach to representation. He is represented by Wolf as the fight takes place in Luigi's mansion, a reference to the Shinra mansion where Cloud and company first meet Vincent. The character choice here is meant to allude to Vincent's use of guns in battle, his claw gauntlet, and his first limit break, Galleon Beast. The reference to this limit break extends to the buff to defense as Wolf turns giant, a nod to the buff Vincent gains turning into the beast that is a blend of a werewolf and the Final Fantasy behemoth. Finally, the music choice for the battle connects to the Castlevania series, more specifically to the first phase of the Dracula boss fight in the first Castlevania title. This is a reference to the vampire imagery Vincent is strongly associated with. Yuffie's Spirit Battle is an interesting one. The player faces off against Sheik in her green alt, matching Yuffie's color scheme, while acknowledging her ninja background through the moveset and the inspiration behind the Sheikah in Ocarina of Time. The battle takes place in Gaur Plains, a callback to Wutai and the Da Chao statue overlooking Yuffie's homeland. To end on a high note, this spirit battle highlights Yuffie through its items and their relationship to Sheik. All featured items are spherical, being automatically dragged close to Sheik for her to get them, an action that is set as Sheik's priority. The items are an obvious parallel to materia, spherical crystals that hold access to magic in the world of Final Fantasy VII. Sheik attracting the items, which serve as a distraction to herself, references Yuffie being a reckless materia thief in the story. In my opinion, this is a wonderful spirit battle. Next, we have the summon spirits. Most of these bear fewer material grounding the representation to FF7 compared to the other spirits in Sephiroth's board, so we'll quickly go over them. We start with Chocobo and Moogle, a battle against a Mii brawler wearing the Chocobo hat and a white Kirby carrying a Bob-omb. Kirby of course represents the Moogle, and the item he carries is a reference to the boom animation that plays during the summon as the duo charge against their enemies in FF7. The stage choice is Garden of Hope, likely representing the overworld fields of the 1997 classic, where we not only find the Chocobos roaming around, but also the Chocobo farm, where we obtain the Chocomog materia. The latter reference is even more likely when you consider that the stage is highlighted by the frequent spawn of cuckoos, which are not only birds that further drive home the imagery associated with chocobos, but they're also fundamentally farm animals themselves. Next, we have Ifrit, who is faithfully aligned with his FF7 incarnation in spirit form despite his Midgar stage design being based on his FF8 incarnation. Ifrit is represented by a giant red Bowser, a fire-breathing demon king, with the fight taking place in Norfair, a lava-filled environment with platforms on fire. It should be self-evident that this battle is designed to represent Ifrit as a fire elemental summon and a demonic entity in the Final Fantasy series. Next, we have Shiva. She is represented by Zero Suit Samus, a character that visually parallels the iconic Final Fantasy summon down to her ponytail and blue color scheme. She is accompanied by Crystal, a blue female character from the Star Fox series who attacks with ice magic. The battle takes place in the summit, with Freezies spawning around the stage. All of this paints a clear theming around the ice element that Shiva as a summon is tied to. The music choice for this battle, however, is quite peculiar. Instead of Fight On, which played in Ifrit's spirit battle, Shiva features the Genova battle theme, which seems to paint more a picture of representing the FF7 villain herself in this battle as well. The music playing in a stage that depicts the top of a glacier with auroras in the background harkens back to Genova's own history, as she landed on the planet right where today stands the Northern Crater, a place constantly engulfed in snow and ice. It really makes me wonder if this is the remnant of a scrapped Genova spirit battle. To conclude the summon spirits, we have Bahamut Zero, a fight against the giant Mecha Ridley in Midgar. The character choice is an obvious attempt to visually parallel the FF7 summon, as well as having Ridley's final smash, Plasma Scream, serve as a parallel to Bahamut Zero's iconic move, Terra Flare. The stage choice is possibly meant to harken back to Bahamut Zero being the highlight summon in the Midgar stage in Super Smash Bros., but the music choice being the Advent Children version of Fight On might point to a different intent. It might actually be calling back to the Bahamut Sin battle from Advent Children, as it took place in the neighboring city to Midgar, known as Edge. It's a real possibility, but I prefer the Smash-oriented interpretation, as it's focused on the actual FF7 summon the spirit is about, rather than a compilation entity. At last, we have our final spirit of the entire board, Rufus and the Turks. The fight takes place in Forside, a visual parallel to Shinra HQ amidst the urban landscape of Midgar. At the start, the player faces off against a Mii sword fighter and a brawler, both designed to match Lino and Rude respectively. Indeed, Lino as a sword fighter aligns with his weapon of choice in FF7, while Rude's brawler representation reflects his hands-on approach to combat. After a certain time passes, two Mii gunners join the fray, whose appearance and fighting style are meant to point to these new fighters representing Zhang and Irena. This order of appearance reflects how these characters are paired by relationship in FF7, with Lino and Rude being closer partners that share their thoughts and grievances with their work, while Irena possesses an enormous admiration for Zhang throughout the adventure. Once the player defeats the 4 Turks, Robin, wielding a steel diver, appears as the final foe to overcome. The white alt carries dual meaning to the representation here. It is both a direct callback to Rufus's iconic white attire and, almost in a fittingly poetic manner, a nod to the Final Fantasy origins of Robin's own white alt, being a reference to the original white mage. Finally, the steel diver he uses references the Shinra President's shotgun, his weapon of choice for battles. And with that, we've concluded Sephiroth Spirit Board, and by extension, we've finally covered all of the Final Fantasy VII content celebrated by Super Smash Bros. Our Encore journey, ladies and gentlemen, now reaches its end. It's time for the closing thoughts as we reflect on this extensive history, its payoffs, and the meaning that Nintendo and Sakurai's initiative carried in bringing back the original FF7 to the spotlight. Crossovers, collaborations, and retrospectives to major works of art aren't anything new to most in contact with media these days. In fact, a lot of such works garnered a remarkable popularity of their own, ranging from Fortnite with its skins covering a variety of media to Super Robot Wars, with its compilation of mecha anime series in an original setting. This popularity extended into crossover fighting games, especially over the past decade or so, with even more to come. Amidst all of this, Super Smash Bros. Is still, to this day, a work of art that stands out among the rest by its design philosophy. Through its detailed presentation of character, universes, and history under the backdrop of an appreciation for the art and the union of these IPs, Smash serves as a platform for preservation and reverence to the source material it deals with. The character's participation in its roster is an event that is relevant to any analysis of legacy and aftermath of the work said character comes from, especially when said work is closely related to Smash's artistic development and the people involved in its creation. It is for these reasons that delving into Smash history and the handling of FF7 in Nintendo's crossover franchise was worthy of its own Encore feature for a living legacy. Simply talking about Sephiroth in Smash without the background defined by the artists involved and their relations would have been quick and simple. In fact, that's something I'm sure most content creators on YouTube dedicated to Nintendo or Final Fantasy have already done by now. But it would be unreasonable of me to ignore this history illustrating what is essentially a parallel story of Final Fantasy VII's legacy beyond its effects on the artists directly involved in the 1997 classic, the franchise it's a part of, and the company that made it possible. It paints the picture of its impact to the ones that regretted losing its presence on original release and how that loss, ironically, shaped their future endeavors and paved their path to this moment in recent history. Perhaps more than any other character added to Super Smash Bros., Cloud and Sephiroth not only carried a special significance for their home franchise's representation within the crossover itself, but their inclusion is also a testament to a legacy and history that both encapsulates and transcends Smash itself. Cloud was the one that opened the gates and served as a premise for the payoffs to come for Square's awaited return to Nintendo, especially with the original Final Fantasy VII. But even with a small set of privileges and care given under the restrictions of its time, it wouldn't be until the Fallen Soldier's inclusion that the industry and fans truly grasped the magnitude of this reunion within Nintendo's crossover. The FF7 villain's debut was the symbolic epitome of all of the promises from Cloud's debut coming to life. Far more than a mere inclusion spawned by a collaboration effort and negotiations from a small couple of years prior, Cloud and Sephiroth were a result of an extensive and rich history dating back to the days of Smash's inception. A history defined by a fanbase's attachment to a departed series whose most promising and medium-changing entry never left the minds of older players, inspiring a massive outcry for its return and a debut in Nintendo's crossover series. A history of Nintendo themselves trying to re-establish the bond and creative support from artists once lost by inconvenience, miscommunication, and outright directorial missteps. A history defined by fortunate events that led artists to meet, collaborate, and help reapproximate old partners through a Super Smash Bros. Entry. And above all else, a history built on a long-lasting appreciation for a work of art and its legacy by Nintendo, its artists, Masahiro Sakurai, and his team. It should be evident from the extensive representation and the extravagant manner in which Sephiroth was released that the original Final Fantasy VII was indeed among the most valued works by Nintendo and Sakurai's team. Sephiroth's pack and FF7's content in general might not have been the most extensive in volume, the pioneer among third-party franchises getting a second stage, the most talked about and predicted inclusion for Smash 4 and Ultimate, the most used set of characters in the competitive scene these days, the most internet-breaking review, nor the most requested character and franchise to get in Smash Bros. But despite all of this, I'd argue that Sephiroth and the Final Fantasy VII legacy he represented through the content that came with him might have been the most meaningful of all inclusions. You can tell by the sum of its parts. It's a selection of content with outstanding attention to detail that is among the best when compared to other franchises in Nintendo's crossover, including ones created by Nintendo themselves. It's the series that pioneered the special victory screen traits both in Smash 4 and Ultimate. It's the first third-party franchise to get a second unique representative in the roster. Sephiroth is the first third-party villain in general, with the legacy Sakurai himself put on the same level as Bowser's, Nintendo's biggest antagonist and gaming's most famous villain. It's the DLC Spirit Board with the largest amount of spirits, with this being achieved despite 3 Nintendo IPs having Spirit Boards of their own and 2 of those being RPG series, which usually serve as a large pool of content to pull from. Sephiroth's release was the only one among the DLC characters in Smash history to warrant a new temporary mode that allowed for an early unlock and designed as an homage to its source material. The narrative-focused approach to Sephiroth's stage is not only unique and directly correlated to the identity of the source material, but it was also actively highlighted by Sakurai himself for its one-of-a-kind design. Of all DLC inclusions, Masahiro Sakurai would highlight on his YouTube channel that Sephiroth was the character to crash internal servers as the Fallen Soldier was revealed to developers as being their next inclusion to work on. Of all additions to Smash Ultimate in general, Sephiroth's content is the inclusion that carries the history that dates the furthest back, with the most extensive journey to reach the payoff of being in Nintendo's elite roster. In the end, Cloud and Sephiroth's inclusions were massive payoffs to both FF7 and Smash's histories, payoffs that, ironically, would even facilitate and influence other roster additions, including the biggest fan demand character of all time. Indeed, FF7's integration to Smash would partially serve as a springboard for bringing Sora from Kingdom Hearts to Nintendo's crossover. This came as a result of the support from Square Enix after their very positive impressions on the partnership to bring Cloud in Smash, on top of helping bridge that quality assurance to the Walt Disney Company once Sakurai made the official request. Sora's inclusion itself is also an interesting payoff considering the aforementioned history Kingdom Hearts has as an offspring of the Nintendo influence existing during FF7's development. To top it all off, FF7's celebrated presence in Smash Ultimate would serve as the defining tone for Nintendo and Square's relationship for years to come. We still see the effects of this even now with the Nintendo Directs of the past few years featuring revivals of classic Squaresoft titles and new franchises on Nintendo's platform, consistently being the company with the most extensive participation in these presentations. Looking back at the Nintendo Switch generation, Square Enix is easily the third-party partner with the strongest presence on the system. To drive this point home, as I was editing this video, Nintendo announced and released the remake of Super Mario RPG, the title that served as a quasi-swan song to the corporate relationship between Nintendo and Square. I don't think there is anything as symbolically powerful of a signal that the ties have been reforged as seeing Nintendo and Square co-develop this game again, and how poetic that said title also served as the prelude to the advent of Square's 3D endeavors, being virtually the visual predecessor to FF7's direction with the adoption of pre-rendered backgrounds with matching surfaces for characters to walk on. And finally, how ironic it is that this game ended up being an incredibly reverent and faithful approach to a beloved classic, considering how things have turned out with Final Fantasy VII. Oh, if only things were different, and we had the same type of Nintendo supervision for that too. It goes without saying that Super Mario RPG Remake's existence is a testament to the success of the journey Final Fantasy VII had for Nintendo up to Smash's inclusion of the legendary Squaresoft classic. Looking back at all of this work, it's undeniable how much effort was put into making this preservation of Final Fantasy VII through Smash Bros. Possible. Satoru Iwata, one of the ones responsible for Smash's creation and the path it took in terms of its crossover concerns, is most likely a key figure behind all of this. He was already one of the main reasons old Squaresoft artists were brought back into Nintendo's umbrella in one form or another. With his knowledge on Smash's feedback from fans over the years and his investment as president in bringing Square Enix back as a partner since his debut in the early 2000s, it has been argued in part 1 of this Encore feature that Iwata was one of the main people responsible for Cloud's inclusion in Smash 4 specifically. It is also known that Smash Ultimate was very much Iwata's last request to Sakurai. So, in many ways, Ultimate was made as a form of honoring Iwata's own legacy. While the roster itself wasn't chosen by the late Nintendo president, it is interesting to note that Nintendo themselves, to be specific, its creative leads and directors, were the ones responsible for the DLC selection. Sakurai would mention in an interview that the game's DLC already lied outside Iwata's mission. But Nintendo choosing the cast for the Fighter's Pass still served as an opportunity for them to select characters that would carry relevance and meaning to Iwata's legacy. Which of the 11 characters fits the bill is something we probably won't get an official confirmation anytime soon. But at least we can get some idea from all the preceding history surrounding his work and the IPs represented in both Fighter's Passes. To drive this point home, I present to you what is a small but meaningful comment from Tetsuya Nomura when interviewed for a Smash Ultimate retrospective piece by GameSpot. Quote, "It's truly an honor that Cloud, Sephiroth, and now Sora, not just one or two of the characters I helped make, but 3 of them, have been invited into a world that features such an impressive group of characters. I had been hoping to repay Mario and friends someday, as I've greatly enjoyed so many of their games, so this opportunity has made me so happy. In fact, nothing makes me happier than seeing the fans' joy towards the 3 of them, and I hope that Mr. Iwata would be pleased with their inclusion too." In retrospect, it's quite fascinating how much this story conveys Final Fantasy VII influencing journeys of people that are not even directly linked to the development of the original game. Now that Sephiroth has joined Super Smash Bros., FF7's presence and representation in Super Smash Bros. May have now reached its maximum point. If Sakurai or Nintendo, by some good twist of fortune, ever decide to expand the FF7 cast one more time in the distant future, I hope they take into consideration the following. In such a scenario, it is only natural by Smash's own philosophy to lean onto the next biggest character to Final Fantasy VII. Among the remaining lead characters, most would find themselves having to pick between Tifa and Aerith. If this Encore feature gave any hint of where to go with this, the most coherent choice for a third FF7 character to Smash Bros. Would have to be Aerith. And I say this for a couple of reasons. Not only would it be good for Smash's approach to differentiate from Dissidia's FF7 roster, but it would also be an opportunity to capitalize on Smash's own history of callbacks to her and how they were executed. As previously observed, she is the only currently non-playable FF7 character that got any major nod in Smash outside Spirit battles. Her moveset would be a very unique one to craft, even among other potential Final Fantasy characters that could join the roster. This moveset could range from her FF7 limit breaks and magic to physical attacks with her staff. In this indulgence in magic, Aerith should even serve as the stepping stone to represent material usage, which the other FF7 reps in the roster didn't have. Her inclusion would also be an opportunity for the original incarnation of Aerith to get a rebirth, especially on a visual level. And no, New Game Plus is no such rebirth, no pun intended. Finally, and most importantly, as Smash itself seemed to recognize, Aerith is, from a narrative perspective, the main heroine of the original Final Fantasy VII. It is only natural that, considering Smash's philosophy of roster expansion since Melee, the Flower Girl should be the next step. I don't know if another FF7 character will ever be added after Sephiroth. In fact, I lean towards that not happening, even if it would be a wonderful base game addition for a future Smash Bros. Title. In case they really do go for it someday though, hopefully they follow the line of thought I presented. But if FF7's content has truly reached its peak, it would definitely still be remembered for its meaning, quality, and presence in Smash history. It brought fans of different generations together in appreciation of a classic work and reintroduced Final Fantasy's powerful presence back into the Nintendo fanbase in full force. Perhaps now the door is finally open for other Final Fantasy entries to join this Hall of Fame, and what better one to choose than the sister game to FF7. I'm certainly rooting for her over everyone else. At the end of the day, there might be future titles in this crossover series, with even more universes and icons added to the series' repertoire, perhaps even expanding into new media territory. But hardly would there ever be something like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate ever again. Looking at how much was accomplished with this one inclusion, considering the history behind it and the people that made it happen, all amidst a set of so many historic and meaningful inclusions alongside iconic veterans in the biggest crossover of its kind, Smash Ultimate, or rather, Super Smash Bros. Special, as it is called in its land of origin, is a work of art that has truly lived up to its name, even with all of its flaws. And I say this referring to both fans and the artists that this crossover work has proudly represented. With all of this said, I hope you enjoyed this bonus journey to a living legacy. This is not only an addendum to FF7's history and legacy, but this encore was made as a gift for every one of you out there who loved my work on the 1997 Squaresoft Classic. This channel has only grown throughout this exploration of Final Fantasy VII, and it has only been possible because of you, dear viewer. To all my patrons, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your help. You guys helped me in a time of need and allowed for this channel to grow even further. I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to my distinguished patrons, O Hobbit, Nicolaus Valoria, William Hamilton, and Unexpected Piano, Orion85, Goofus, and Dan D. I can't thank you all enough for your support. To new viewers coming from the Smash fandom, thank you for checking my content out. And please, do consider taking a look at the other stuff I've made so far, including A Living Legacy itself. I'm sure you will find something to your liking. To everyone who enjoyed this video, as always, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and commenting down below. And to those of you who wish to support this channel, donations would be immensely appreciated, as it's the only way to have an income out of this endeavor and have a large enough support for me to dedicate to it as a full-time career. You can find my Patreon linked in the description to donate. For this Encore feature, I also want to give special thanks to my friend ST and Orichalcon for all their Smash and Ea Guides footage used. Their contribution to this project has been extensive, and it couldn't have looked this good without their help. I also want to give a shout out to SN Mario 128 for the cloud edits in part 1. For all translations of Japanese material, I can't thank enough Chapibara, Folk, and Heian. Without you, this project's roots in seeking the source of all relevant information would have been much more limited. There is also a very important group of people I have to express my immeasurable gratitude for. When talking about a potential third representative of FF7 in Smash, you may have noticed the footage showing a stunning display of Aerith in Smash Ultimate. That is the result of a project in development for over a year that I started for this Encore to serve as a legacy of this endeavor to FF7 and Super Smash Bros. Of course, I didn't do this alone. I have the help of the most brilliant animators and programmers in the business, namely Sushi Z, C Sharp, and Incredible Plays. These people have done a fantastic job at bringing this vision to life in such a short amount of time. Their dedication is immensely appreciated. Thank you. Shoutouts as well to Colossal Cake for the Aerith Unlock clip seen here. I must highlight as well the person that has been there with me since the beginning and is the main responsible for nailing Aerith's in-game model and render, Pick PM. I can't stress enough how thankful I am for his dedicated support for so long and working with such an undying passion. All of this while being, in my humble opinion, a strong contender for the greatest and most talented 3D artist and modeler in the Smash community. It is truly an honor to have such an impressive team of artists in the community on board, and I want to express my reverence to them for such an unbelievably polished job done since the development of the first part of this Encore. I hope viewers notice the love and effort put into bringing not only Aerith to life, but also how every philosophy that defines Smash Brothers was implemented in her design. Link to the team members' social media is in the description, and I strongly encourage you, kind viewer, to show your appreciation for them there and in the comments. And with regards to the project itself, stay tuned for future updates. I hope I can present it all to you directly. I also want to highlight my heartfelt thanks to the arrangers and composers for all the music used in this project. Namely, I want to thank Sean Shafiansky, Patty Rudisil, The Consoles, Orchestral Fantasy, Harry Sivan, Portman Tone, Eric L., Mustin, Meine Meinung, Stephen Morris, Joe Mella, 16-Bit Seacow, Gianni Abel, Box Monkey Studios, Zorzi, Zonga, The 8-Bit Big Band, Pitan, Yone Valtonen, Yoko Shimomura, Erika Fukasawa, Miho Hazama, Shogo Sakai, Keiichi Okabe, Hirokazu Ando, and Nobuo Uematsu for all the beautiful arrangements and compositions. To Nobuo Uematsu, Shogo Sakai, Taizo Takemoto, and all musicians involved in bringing Smash music to life, thank you so much for all of your unparalleled work to the medium. Your music is part of what made this beautiful story possible, as expressed in part 1 of this Encore feature, and which I was gladly proven right by Sakurai's video on Press Start. By the way, thank you for promoting my video, Takemoto-san. This video also can't go without expressing the gratitude many feel to this day for those who brought the original Final Fantasy VII and all subsequent legacy Square IPs to Nintendo's crossover and making the dreams of many fans come true. Special highlight to Shinji Hashimoto, at the time the brand manager of Final Fantasy and Square Enix's executive director. He was the pivotal man behind giving the final word on Final Fantasy's presence in Smash, as well as personally vouching for Nintendo and Sakurai to convince Disney to bring Sora to Nintendo's crossover. Of course, I can't thank enough Masahiro Sakurai, the late Satoru Iwata, and everyone at Nintendo who helped make Super Smash Bros. What it is today. Finally, thank you all so much for watching. I leave you all with a final brief reflection. Final Fantasy VII has suffered over the years from an extensive exploitation of its legacy to build an unrecognizable set of works that gave the IP a different reputation from what it used to have. Even in works like Dissidia Final Fantasy, this altered vision of FF7 would live on in place of the original one. In many ways, this situation contributed to the game losing its prestige and many questioning its position as one of the greatest works of its medium. New generations of players had no idea of what the original FF7 entailed, what its strengths and weaknesses truly were. Many of these folks saw newer material, like the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, Kingdom Hearts, and crossover appearances as points of reference to have an idea of who Cloud and Sephiroth might be. This isn't just me saying this, by the way. Take it from Yoshinori Kitase himself, the main responsible for the handling of FF7's IP since the merger. On the other hand, you have a bunch of older players who haven't revisited the game for a long time and find themselves struggling to recall what made it so great. Despite all of this, the original Final Fantasy VII, its achievements, its characters, and its world would still manage to live on in those who still held onto the original experience all these years. FF7 would make a huge comeback a little over 20 years after its release, as the 1997 classic debuted on Nintendo almost like it was a new game, and it eventually got cherished, celebrated, and faithfully represented in Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. It would be a disservice to Smash Ultimate and all the effort put into it to not recognize it as being, among numerous things, also a love letter to Final Fantasy VII and the journey surrounding its arrival on the Nintendo system. The impeccable quality and the massive hype surrounding Sephiroth's inclusion not long after FF7's debut on Nintendo Switch incentivized both old and new players to visit the universe of Mako, Magic, and Meteor. The official release by Square Enix of Final Fantasy VII on newer systems might still be subpar with an inaccurate translation and blurred backgrounds, but even amidst these problems, many were still able to have a newfound appreciation of this classic. The incentives brought by Nintendo has breathed a much needed new life to the original Final Fantasy VII. In the end, it seems the universe really doesn't exist without its fair share of poetic irony. The ones to truly value and help revitalize the source material in a time of an identity crisis for the IP are precisely the ones from the company that initially demonstrated indifference by FF7's departure. And what a fortunate turn of events that turned out to be. Final Fantasy VII's legacy has finally found an era of appreciation once again, and its impact and history are forever immortalized in the greatest and most revered crossover of its medium to ever exist.